This is the Men's Room Podcast, where relief is your duty and your innate self is welcome. I'm your host, Ish Mendoza, and I am pleased that you stopped by. Today's episode is featuring a really close friend of mine, Anthony, whose story is inspiring and heartfelt and heartbreaking and remarkable. And really thankful for his vulnerability in sharing it. In this first half, we're going to be getting into some pretty intense topics like drug use, addiction, death. And so a bit of a trigger warning. This is definitely not for the faint of heart. And we're going to be sharing our stories growing up in poverty as Mexican Americans and a lot more important topics to talk about. So without further ado, let's get into it. It's a little awkward usually because you and I, we shoot the shit all the time and we just naturally have these conversations. In a formalized environment, it feels a little weird. It feels a little different. Especially like even I'll set the stage. We're in our room, in my room, in my studio, and we're like at a little distance. It works for control aspects and stuff like that too. But the distance is just kind of like normally we'd probably be across the table from each other, like in a way that's structured. But I hope you're comfortable at least in sitting
dude,
position.
I'm cozy, man. I'm real cozy.
But yeah, we're here at the Men's Room studio on a Tuesday night, and I'm with my homie, my good buddy Anthony. He's joining us. But I want to make you feel comfortable enough just to like forget that the mics are here. That's the whole goal. Even though we have headphones on and we're listening to each other speak.
Yeah.
I came bearing gifts. I got a couple of different options.
Ooh,
so one of the things that I've been like finding in this podcast is using this idea of this weapon of choice. So it's kind of in encompassing or like encouraging vices. And I think that because it's like really dealing with mental health and a lot of other things that we dive into, so I'm kind of welcoming that, like the weapon of choice that makes you feel a little bit more comfortable.
The baby's bottle.
So the weapon of choice for this one is kind of based on our roots. It's our roots of like West Coast minorities hip hop. I got some gin and juice.
No way. No way. I'll do a little.
All right. Yeah. So shout out to
back.
Exactly with my mind on my money. And my money on my mind.
We've come a long way, brother.
We'll jump right into it, but I want to dig into the subject of cannabis a little bit of backstory. Usually, a lot of people use marijuana, cannabis to like help alleviate their stresses and anxiety. For me, it's always been a stress-inducing or like anxious-inducing factor for me.
Yeah.
So you kind of shared this idea with me, but have you experienced anything that's like has cannabis been anything that's alleviating for you?
It's been an interesting journey for me. I feel like I started because the way I grew up was pretty crazy. So, always being surrounded by the stuff and all these types of drugs and so on, and it influenced all me and my siblings all in different ways for sure. And some of us now addicts, that, something we've talked about before, but, for me, and I think for, I'll just speak for myself. For me, it didn't influence me in any way that, made it enticing at all. Like I thought it was just this thing I wanted to stay away from. And,
was it that though? Did you like set out to like say no, like, did you lean into the Dare Say No to Drugs program?
You know what it is? It's hard to actually say, as best as I can reflect and analyze myself, and especially my former younger self. It's hard to know exactly why. It's like these educated guesses, I guess, but, because we're always trying to figure ourselves out, I guess, even when we think we know ourselves the best.
Constant works in progress.
It's constant work to know yourself because life is constantly changing, so you're changing with it and so on and so forth. But so for me, what I think it was is that it was a combination of things. It was that I saw this stuff being used and the kind of people that it came with, and the lifestyles and the situations. But also, some of it wasn't very conscious of me. I
Like you don't recall the details of it, or
well, more so that it was just a consequence of interests. So once, you know, once most of the craziest stuff was kind of coming to an end of my childhood with, all the intense poverty and, my father passing away and all that stuff that followed that, we moved to our third or fourth city by then. And I met these kids because I was a kid too, and they were friends with my younger brother. And once I joined their friend group, by the time maybe fifth grade rolled around, I remember the oldest one of the friend group. He got into the Misfits, and and he was kind of like the leader of the pack, and so whatever he said, we kind of did. And I grew up listening to hip hop and rap and stuff like that because that kind of lifestyle that I grew up in kind of comes with that territory. And
was it the black gospel influence kind of thing?
Yeah, man, it's Tupac lips now, Yeah, no, I was a Tupac fiend, and so yeah, we got into punk music, and then right away, I think lends to some of the things that I think about now about like why, or questions that I ask about myself now. It's like, why did I get so into music? And maybe it was because I was trying to find an outlet. I was trying to get out of the situation I was in, and so anything that came across my path that was interesting. And also I think I was tapping into this inner artist of me that I didn't know I was yet.
Was it more escapism, kind of like you used it to fill a kind of a mental void or something?
Mental, psychological, emotional, like all the things that are downstream from identity, I guess. Just a void. And so I pursued music so intensely. First when it comes to just listening to it, I got into punk rock music, and then that turned into this what at the time seemed obscure, which later turned into this indie craze and early emo stuff, and all the messy guitars and the messy vocals, and and the grungier stuff, I guess, and with all its imperfections, which I always gravitated towards that style of indie music too, and stuff. Like I never was one for a good singer, but all those things, like that pursuit of music. That's what I mean when I say unconsciously I was not very enticed by the drug world, I guess.
That wasn't the thing that, because you're right, there's a lot of if you think about kids that grew up in the hood, or like kids that grew up a certain way or whatever, they're prone to do things that that will shift them in a direction of, like, number one, following the footsteps of the things that they only knew by seeing.
Yes.
Or they turn to it completely, and a lot of people will say, like, my dad was a drunk, my dad was an alcoholic or a drug addict, or all these things, and so now I gave my life to Christ, or like they go all in this other direction completely to try to avoid that lifestyle. And then there's the other ones that like maybe haven't processed it, and they kind of through the years are discovering like the things that they used to process historically. Do you think that was more of like what you've kind of come to discover, or it's a part of it?
So you're saying if I kind of went the opposite direction versus falling in the same footsteps?
What I mean is that, like, some kids are able to identify early on something that they potentially can see right away. 10, 11 years old, they have this epiphany of like, my dad was this and I'm never going to do that. Or they'll say like, no, dad was doing it, I can do it too.
Yeah, I think that I was very self-aware at a very young age. So I've had conversations with my brother before, and my mom and my sisters and my other brother and just the whole family, and just talking about things, and you kind of get a sense of where you were at any given age, talking to your siblings. They help contextualize memories sometimes that feel fragmented. And one thing that I've kind of understood without, I was very self-aware at a fairly young age. And maybe it's not young, that's a subjective claim, I guess, but maybe what I mean to say is I was very self-aware about the kind of dangers of life, I guess. And so because of that, you just you see it for all the negative things that it is. And there was no, like now drug culture is completely different. Drug culture in the 90s were not the same thing. There was like the war on drugs and all that stuff that has been going on for a long time. And so drug culture back then was strictly associated, at least if you came from communities that I came from, it was associated with violence and addiction and all these things. No one was talking about psychedelics and stuff like that, at least, on the streets that I grew up in.
No, it's true. I mean, so growing up, you and I have very similar backgrounds. We've kind of talked about it. We've floated into these circles of like cultural influences around us. But like one of the things is, being a Mexican American in an impoverished community, but also like being a poor kid yourself, that has a lot to do with the shape that, we eventually become. And the same thing, like the things around us, and also like music, like you brought up Tupac. I mean, like that was kind of the thing, is like minorities are like, we sell drugs to like survive kind of thing, or it's like, we sell our own. Like there's a lot of stuff that like, there's a lot of baggage that comes with it too. But like, even I was thinking about it, I was listening to another podcast actually that was talking about how cocaine had been historically like the rich man drug. And so like that was never an issue on the streets, like in the impoverished neighborhoods, until it became crack, and that was easily accessible and things like that. But before, it was like only the rich people could afford cocaine.
Yeah, you just change the label, and I think that's true of so many societal disparities throughout history. You change the categorization, and then you can demonize a whole people, or you can demonize a whole class of or style of living, or so on and so forth. It's just it's a wink and a nod, as they say.
Yeah, I mean, you can almost control like it. There's a lot of layers. I'm no conspiracy theorist, but there's been patterns in history that we've seen more than once. Where you give these poor communities not the fighting chance that they deserve, and so there's not a whole lot of alternatives that they can turn to other than these things that are in front of them, really.
Yeah, it's tough. I always have these kind of, debates in my mind about what is the solution. There's
well, it's kind of like it's handed down for you. There's a lot of systemic stuff. I don't like to get into the specifics about, because I always feel like people use society or systems as a kind of a way to like give themselves a pass in a lot of ways.
Oh yeah.
But there is a lot of like things that are just kind of innately like ingrained in someone that it's hard to shake. It's hard to shake out of that like poor, like, so like for example, Tammy and I, we worked hard, and we're in a pretty comfortable place financially. Like, we're providing for our family, and we bought a home. Like we're in a good place. But my mindset is so stuck to the being poor that I always feel like at any given point, it's just all going to go up in flames, and I there's nothing I can do about it. And so like there's so much anxiety around like being poor, because I always feel like I'm going to get back to being poor in some way, Do you ever feel like that? Like, do you ever, I don't know, maybe it's the way I'm living, or something else to it as well too, but like that's always a worry of mine. It's just like at any given point, I'm going to get back to being dirt poor again.
Really, like it all can just come crashing down on you.
Yeah, and I shouldn't feel this way. I should have like more like hope and stuff too, but like I don't know, I just feel like there's a lot of stuff that's kind of ingrained in me where I feel like and maybe it's more so like me being a man now and being having the provider mindset, but I always feel like, so my job, my day job, it's in the tech industry, and we kind of took a hit. Like technology is like taking an economic hit, so there's a lot of layoffs happening. Like I'm sure you heard, like Facebook, Twitter, all those things had like the mass layoffs.
Yeah.
But that trickled down to other companies like mine as well, and so I've kind of like had this doomsday kind of gloomy sensation, because I'm like, my job's gone, and that's everything I worked for. That's everything that like, and the alternative to that is that we're not in this like coal mining industrial economy right now, where like the reality is that if I lose my job, it'd be sad, but there are other jobs that I can get. I can, search for stuff. And it's not like
Yeah.
I've been working at the Ford factory for 20 years. And so when I lose my job, there's nowhere else to go.
Yeah, but interesting because you say that, you started off talking about how that comes from your childhood, and how like you shouldn't feel that way. But then you follow that by expressing this idea of insecurity right now, financial insecurity in this moment.
Yeah, it is an insecurity.
And so it's an insecurity. Then is the insecurity worth it when the situation actually comes? Is it more how do I frame this? Where trying to think about the silver lining of all our negative experiences, like what does it nurture? What is it, like Margaret Thatcher or whatever? The best way a child can be raised is poor and with good parents or something like that.
I've heard this something similar to it. I think
But my point is to say that, how the paranoid survive, like, to a certain extent, it taught you that lesson. So even though that's insecurity at times can be a heavy burden for you as a man trying to provide for his family, it also helped you prepare for that moment, which I think you're a very resilient person. Like I've always thought that about you, that you're very just resilient, and and like you kind of coast through. Like I feel like when we have like our really deep conversations, like you convey a sense of well, like I can see the undercurrent in you sometimes when we talk. I can feel the undercurrent, but the way it expresses itself is so calm. And like, but I don't believe it's because you're being naive to the undercurrent.
Yeah.
But it's just that you have so much, you're so calm, and that comes from, a very controlled personality of yours that is just well-rounded. Like you can handle that stress in a way that then when expressed is very graceful, and so it's I've always admired that about you. So, to connect the dots, so to speak, I guess, is that you mentioned it as a childhood insecurity, but we talk, and your point of why you don't like to talk about you don't like those things to be talked about for the sake of an excuse for why you're not doing better as an adult. Economically, sometimes you have this kind of paradox type of feeling, where you're like, but now that I'm an adult and I've really seen who's doing something and who's not, maybe.
Yeah.
I know that it does take hard work. And so, I'm proud of the hard work I did. Let's not sweep that under the rug just because we feel guilty of the growing pains of to become that adult,
Yeah, you're right. So thank you, first of all. I mean, there is a level of like scrappiness that comes with it, because you're almost in a way like it's the motivation. Like it's the factor of like, you're chasing the carrot at the end of the stick kind of thing, And so, and it's not for me, it's never been a financial gain, but it's more of the security gain that I've been seeking all this way.
Yeah.
And it is shaped by my upbringing and things like that too. But you hit a bunch of things there that I completely agree with, because when we were poor as kids, it's crazy because I didn't know we were poor, because like, my parents were there. I remember my dad working hard. I remember him, my mom she had 4 of us, so she had to stay at home, and do these things and stuff like that too. But even at that, like she was picking up little odd jobs and doing other things, But I didn't realize we were poor until like kids at school like tell you how poor you are, when they're like telling you exactly like where'd you get your shoes, or all this other stuff that comes around with like childhood bullying or whatever else it is too. But I didn't know we were poor, and so like ignorance is bliss in a lot of ways. So that Margaret Thatcher quote is kind of like, the kids don't know that they're poor, but then you get to a point where you surround yourself with maybe people that are in different spaces and things like that too, and you kind of like it's hard because you don't know what you don't know, and then when you do know that, it's harder to like navigate it.
Yeah, well, you're that's very true. I think what you're saying is exactly what the way the idea quote ends is that with good parents, and so you're in a very articulate and trying to convey the experience way, you're saying you had good parents.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, that's a very foundational anchor that I probably don't give enough credit to, because number one, both of my parents were around, and they still are. That's a rare thing to have parents that are. I didn't go through a divorce. I didn't also go through stuff that a lot of people have to deal with. Loss of a parent and all these other things and stuff too.
Yeah.
And they're not perfect at all. There's a lot of things that I see, in my upbringing and things like that I'm able to, like, now as an adult process and things like that too. But there was a foundation. There was something that was like, I always attribute it to, like, the analogy that I really like is this anchor. So, like, this boat can be, like, swaying from the top up, but it doesn't move from its position because it's anchored to the bottom that's stable.
Yeah.
And so that's, oftentimes I overlook that.
Yeah. They were your anchor. What's funny is you saying you had them as an anchor and they kind of kept you safe, you could say. Mm-hmm. And then once the world was revealed to you for what it was, they then also helped you contextualize it.
Yeah, it's true.
And
well, at the very least, they didn't push back when I was, like, self-navigating. They didn't give me, like, any, like, well, why are you asking questions about, like, was I not a good parent? They didn't, like, parents can react to that when you're starting, like, asking about, like, hey, did we ever do this? Or, you start doing those processing kind of questions. Mom, did you ever, remember when we did this? Or and so in the first episode that I recorded, I went to a deep dive of my name being Ismael, and I, like, took a shot at my parents in a funny way that was like, thanks Mom and Dad for naming me Ismael in an English speaking country, And then my mom heard it and she's like, I'm sorry you hated your name. And I was like, no, Mom. I was like, I made light of a situation, but people butchered that and things like that too. So,
hey, you brought up a really good topic that I always used to think about, was that as you grow up in the era that we were Mexican American, mm-hmm. It wasn't like now, and thankful to, the music indie scenes that we are very familiar with, this new, more compassionate side of music that enjoys the culture, and maybe that's a part of, like, as you get older and if you navigate down a certain vein of life, you would get into what you would consider cultural, mm-hmm. Concepts and ideas and appreciation for them. So now it's definitely way more accepted and celebrated to have, like, that kind of culture to you where your name is said with an accent. But the way we grew up, it was not like that at all. So, and, like, I used to be happy, and this is the guilt that caught up with me when I realized, I should be proud of what all these things, even the dirtiness of it all, because there's value in it, the life that you talking about not knowing you're poor. I knew that I was poor at a certain age, and why that happened for me and not for you and stuff. It's all getting processed right now behind what I'm saying. But
I think so. The insecurities that I felt, it stemmed from a lot of that, because my name, it's probably an insecurity of me as well.
That's what it was. Okay.
And so it ties into, I didn't grow up speaking Spanish. I speak decent. I speak professionally fluent Spanish. I can get by. I can have a full on conversation. I can live in Mexico and not have to rely on anybody else. But that didn't come until later in life, until, like, I started, like, purposely, like, seeking that out. My parents didn't speak to us in Spanish. The only time they spoke Spanish when they were trying to hide something from us. So they would say it so that we wouldn't understand what they were saying. But, we're immersed in the culture and stuff like that too. But so I think I was a little bit insecure because I couldn't even say my name, like, properly right until I was a certain age too. So there was probably an insecurity of that too. Maybe my identity, not knowing, like, I'm not fully Mexican. I don't have a lot of traditional. I didn't grow up, listening to banda music and all this other stuff that other Mexicans did.
Yes.
But I also wasn't fully American, So it's like duality of, like.
Yes, that's exactly how I felt. And what I did when I was young is I would consciously, to myself think, was a real conscious thought, like, I'm so glad my mom named me Anthony, and not Antonio. And we both had that living two identities experience where it creates that dilemma in yourself, where it's like you even have to be conscious about your identity.
Mm-hmm.
That's an interesting mental state, I think, and once again, none of these things are excuses for anything down the line per se, because we now know after growing up that.
But they're points in the navigation map that you
Yes.
you go through. So you have these roadblocks or these landmarks that you hit, and so that is, it's been really a beautiful journey. And I think me being in my late 30s now, discovering a lot of the things of the influence of my past, influence of my upbringing, my current influences, like who I'm. So I struggled with the topic and the audience of this podcast in a lot of different ways, because I'm really involved in certain communities. So me growing up in a Christian community, I had my navigation journey that like I went away from that. So I was a Christian growing up. I resented Christianity. I resented like faith and things like that. And so I went on a journey of like not wanting to believe in God and all these other things. And then now being a family man and really being plugged in back to a faith community in a ways, I like my church now because it's not so like, it's very different than what I grew up with, not like the fire and brimstone, like, the preacher doesn't tell me I'm going to hell every Sunday,
Exactly.
So that's different, but it's also like I struggled with it a bit because I was like, I don't want it to be just for this community that I'm a part of, this one cultural influence that I'm a part of too, So there's that also, I'm like this. There's a term that says like you're all things to all men. So like you're so like, and I struggle with that too because I don't want to be so much of one thing, and I also like try to push away when I feel like I'm being one thing more than the other too.
Yeah.
So it's weird, I know that your journey has been different than mine, but also very similar, especially in the foundation. So I'm curious about, did you ever, or are you currently like in a state of like resenting like your Christian upbringing? Or?
No, yeah, I'm listening, but I feel like you're stealing so many of my feelings and my sentiments in the experience, the type of path that we kind of grow up in with religion.
I want to say that it's a very niche, like, so growing up Christian, that's probably a majority of America, to be quite honest, but we were so like in this subsect of Christianity that there's not a lot of people that same with us. So
yes, and I don't know if you could maybe make an argument that also the region that we were in,
maybe California farm growers,
that had an influence, and what kind of impact that has on us. But I will say that my experience was weird because we didn't grow up with much money. Like after my dad died, it was really crazy for our family. He didn't die in a good way. And so my mom loses her husband, and we buried him on her birthday. My mom was kind of ostracized from the family, so no one really was there for help. And so my mom's brother came, though, our uncle, and he helped like paint the apartment and set it up so that we could get out of there, so we can get our money back, so we can have it to move on. And trickled throughout this, with the move and stuff, like we didn't have a house, so we slept in this tiny van, like 6 kids. And so, and it was always like that. When we would move, like there would just be different moments of where we're homeless now, like you're going to sleep in a car together. Sometimes we would get to stay with relatives for certain things, but that wasn't later until things started getting already better. For the most part, we were just on our own, which is that closeness. But also, and what followed that was, my older sisters getting into gangs and violence and all that stuff and criminal activity. And so my dad's dead. My brother's in the hospital, fighting for his life, essentially. And we're just catapulted, which we already didn't have any money, but we were just catapulted into extreme poverty, extreme poverty where, we talk about kids living in poor conditions and so on, but a lot of times we think about that as like a number on a piece of paper or financial woes, but we kind of forget the mental experience of that all for those kids, and so that's what we were going through. And it was just a roller coaster. And when criminal activity comes around the house and there's no parental control, things are wild. Like my sisters they dropped out of school, middle school, like you hear of dropping out in high school,
Yeah.
And for Mexican Americans, the way we were, that's especially strange because we're not like, the super Mexican ones where maybe there's undocumented people.
Right.
And
You
so
have to start working.
oh, you got to start working. Yeah. It's like, no, you're American enough. And so that's crazy. And especially at middle school, like you would not think of another complexion that is maybe of lighter tone so haphazardly when you hear something like that. And if anything, when you think about that, if you saw that in like an up-to-do white family, maybe you'd be like, oh, wow.
Yeah.
In middle school. So, but anyways, so they dropped out in middle school. And
did they drop out to have private tutors and
exactly. No, they were, probably dealing with the trauma of losing their dad and stuff. They, tend to try to fill the holes with mud. Mm-hmm. And so that, all of a sudden before you know it, it's like a vacant house or living situations.
Sorry to interrupt. How much older were they than you? Or at the time?
The oldest was, I think we're like about 6 years apart.
Okay, so when your dad passed, how old were you?
I was about to turn 5. Yeah.
Okay, so your sisters were...
They were like 10, 11-ish.
Okay, so that was very... Especially in a young woman's life.
Yes, in a young woman's life.
Very influential, yeah.
Yeah, I've heard that there's like evidence to suggest that, not having a father in home has hormonal consequences for women, like they get on the periods earlier and stuff. And, that's an interesting concept. And I think the idea is that there's not that testosterone energy or testosterone presence that kind of subdues the hormonal response that then allows a woman or a girl to then get her period and so on. So there's biological consequences, it seems, but there's also that psychological. And so they, which one comes first, who knows, but
or which one's more prevalent,
Yeah. And so they were looking for probably father figures, maybe, I don't know. They were looking for things to fill the void. And so, they're dating like guys almost 30, and they're like little girls, and my mom's trying to do her best when she's home, like she's struggling to deal with them because she is, that, and that's the thing about the good parent, is like looking back, it's like, man, she held it down. Like she did whatever it damn took, and she did it the best way she could, and she did it the most proper way that she could to teach us how to be a productive individual in society, and not necessarily because economically per se, but as just a good person with a sound mind, generous and kind, selfless, those kind of principles. She taught us them so well. And and it was all through, it wasn't communicated either. It was, and that's why maybe nowadays I find myself a very analytical person in some ways. I kind of read body language, I've been like that since I was a little kid, very observant. I said, I was very self-aware when I was young. And so very, very young age, I just grew up I always was cautious to trust. I was, you kind of live in this paranoid state when you grow up that way. Mm-hmm. And so you're reluctant to feel safe or secure at any moment. And maybe that's what I saw my mom experiencing, because just with her body language, how she talked with people, maybe some things she would say after, without whatever the company that was there, but she always carried herself in a very graceful way. She was always very considerate, very understanding. And sometimes she had her opinions, and sometimes she said things that were a little off the cuff, or maybe coming from more emotional place, but she was very stoic in a lot of ways, my mom, and so
She almost had to be honest.
well, she had to be, but it's just so crazy thinking about her experience, but which is another thing, like I always think about that, like my mom's mentality is just crazy. The stuff she's been through, it's like, and she just keeps going. And to this day, she's so selfless and she does for others so crazy. Now one of my sisters, she's, meth addict on the streets, and she's really, really, really far gone. It's sad to say. And if anyone's ever dealt with someone who's like that, they understand that's like, there's nothing you can do except like be there as much as you can, but, and my mom, spending her last dollars to try to pay for a place so she's not sleeping in the streets, but the place is a disgusting drug addict house. And I have to go there often to go fix the door because someone kicked it in and stole her stuff. And she's, or they're just stealing her room and not letting her sleep there. And, she's half of herself and feeble and just looks like things seem like they've reached the kind of balance in some ways with the situation. Like it's been in the same place for so long, but it's always so close to the edge, really, that you're just always worried about losing them. But my mom's paying for that, with the last pennies, and also just still helping with the church, and she's doing this and she's doing that, and the way she's handling things even when she's not appreciated is just so, she's just so selfless. She's so generous, so considerate, so she always gives the benefit of the doubt in a lot of ways. But she was that in the way she just moved through the world, and as a little kid I would see that.
Mm-hmm. By her example,
she led by example, and so, and she's very cunning, she's so clever, and she's just strong. And so she's that person, but she still doesn't have a husband. She still is in the hospital. She's still trying to raise all these kids by herself. While she was in the hospital with my brother, I didn't finish that point, but her kidney passage collapsed or something from a prior surgery or something like that. And she was my brother was laying in the hospital, and she's like, oh, I'm sorry, baby, but Mama's gonna have to go. She doesn't feel so good. She's gonna need to go talk to somebody. And he's like, no, and she's like, I'm sorry, baby, I don't feel really good. Mommy has to go, okay? And so he's like, okay. He's all sad. And that she got up, she walked out, and she just woke up in a hospital bed.
That's crazy.
It was about to burst. And that was a thing that was going on, while we're dealing with raising ourselves, while my mom's doing the best she can, because she's split so many ways outside of her control. What is she supposed to do? Leave her 4-year-old son in the hospital, go through that trauma, which I know he dealt with trauma because of that. That's where a big portion of a lot of the trauma, and that's kind of what I was talking about earlier, where we all are this big baggage of all these parts of these crazy experiences. You hear it, someone going through one thing or another thing, whatever, or you hear about people living below the poverty line, and you see it as a number on a paper, like I was saying, but there's all these experiences that come with it. And each of us individually from the same experience experienced it in such a different way, all because of the circumstances of life, but I can see in so many ways how all those things manifested themselves in behaviors as we're adults now. And but my mom is doing all this stuff, and then the girls are bringing home weirdos and wannabe gang guys, and then eventually real gang guys, and drugs are coming in and stuff like that, and going out and parties and crazy behavior like stealing cars and just ridiculous stuff looking back, because damn, would life have been so much? Would life even been a fraction better? It could have made the difference, But my sister's getting into that after the death, and then my brother's accident, and my sisters, they had control of that in some ways for sure. But the death and the accident, my mom at the very least had no control over this, with the situation she was in. At least up until a certain point, we can get into accountability at whatever age, whatever.
Yeah.
But she's in this situation, and all throughout this is religion. All throughout this is is this belief that, you know, there's God and God's taking care of you, even if you don't feel it. Like, don't complain, because if you complain, it's because you're loving the world too much. And it's like, but as a little kid, you're like, but goddamn, you know, the in vain there, but it's like, this shit hurts. Mm-hmm. Like this shit fucking hurts. Like, being self-aware at a very young age, I understood how poor I was. And it was a weird feeling, you know, like, I have all these little memories of like where people's kindness, I knew it was because we were poor, you know, wearing the same clothes for way too long, the same shoes till they had holes. Our shoes always had holes. And I remember there was this time where I told this kid, I go, hey, we have the same shoes, you know, we're little kids. And he goes, oh yeah, we do. He's like, except mine don't have holes. You know, like that's what it was. And also like Christmas, you know, there was no money. There was never any money. And so my mom would scrape together whatever she could, you know, $30 for everyone's Christmas, you know, and she would do it, I guess. And so we didn't grow up with the holidays and stuff, which, you know, now that's maybe why I don't really care for them so much. But I appreciate that I don't, which, you know, all these stories, they always come with this kind of also consequence that is a nice kind of place to be in some ways, where you don't really get bogged down by superficial things, you know?
It's crazy because like I'm hearing your story, and a lot of the same things happened to us. So even so much so, like, a lot of people, they were only nice to us because they were, you know, in the church and things like that. But my perception of things is like, it's almost like skewed in such a way that, like, I told you this earlier, is that I didn't really know we were poor. And I remember there was a Christmas, we also didn't have, you know, like Christmas gifts and things like that.
Yeah.
But there was a Christmas where we got all the gifts. It's because the local church in the city of Viola that we were at, they came through and we were their charity case that year, you know?
Yeah.
And I didn't know. I was like, you know, this kid. So in my mind, like, Christmas is very special because it was like such great memories, you know, like this church, this community, all these people that came through to this. But it was because I was oblivious to the fact that we were poor. I just thought it was great.
Interesting, because you have a memory of like the presents coming, at least when they did, and they were nice and wrapped and the community came through. But that never happened for us, I guess. And so, you know, like I remember like a motorcycle gang would come and give us gifts, like Hell's Angels or something like that. I don't know what. You know, I was like way
Toys
too old, getting like Hot Wheel cars, you know, while my friends are having all these cool gaming consoles and stuff, and I'm like, I got Hot Wheels, you know, and I'm like, damn, like, and that's whatever, but it's all the stuff what that really came from, though. Like, I didn't give a shit that I got lame presents. Like, I knew that I did, and I felt like it sucked, but I was just like, but whatever, you know, like, like I wasn't the kind of person that felt sorry for myself for it, but I do know that I felt that it did come with a lot of insecurity because of it. Like, I felt like we were less than in so many ways, and that affected my journey later on with education and stuff.
And there you have it, folks. This concludes part 1 of my conversation with Anthony. Tune in next time for the continuation of our conversation. It gets even deeper. And don't forget to like, rate, follow, and subscribe to our podcast wherever you are listening. And if you're listening to this on Apple Podcasts, please be sure and give us a 5-star review. It really helps the algorithm, and we appreciate it greatly. Until next time, but for now, let's go.